So the stuff I'm going to show you today is really focused on where criminals are focusing on attacking just the average person. And when I say the average person, I mean whether you be a home person, whether you have a small business, whether you be at work. I look at everybody pretty much being the same right now. Everybody's in the same boat and everybody has the same risks, no matter who you are or what you're doing. So I'm going to kind of go through where I'm seeing the big changes and what's happening. Again, if you have a question, feel free to ask. Otherwise, if you want to talk to me at the end, I'll stick around as long as somebody has a question and wants to ask it. So I'll be here to answer anything. Here's kind of a loose agenda. We'll see how much of it I actually get through today. But I like to kind of go back with history. I don't know if you guys remember how the whole virus thing first started. Back in the day when you first got your first computer, the way you got a virus back then is if one of your friends had a floppy disk, they would give you the floppy disk, you'd put it in your computer, and then a virus would get loaded, and that's how you passed a virus from one computer to the other. It was pretty old school, but it was how they went. I remember like you could get and it wasn't malicious. Back then the viruses would be like a smiley face would show up on your computer randomly, and you'd be like, what is that? And that was pretty much viruses. And I remember those things, and there was no real protection. It just pretty much was, don't borrow a floppy from your friend and you'll be fine. Then you got into the internet. And before the internet, there was the ARPANET, and the very first worm, which is malware that spreads on its own, does its own thing, kind of spreads out, was the Morris worm. And nobody really heard about that one because the ARPANET wasn't something that the general public was even dealing with or aware of, so it was just kind of not even paid attention to. However, in 1999, people were finally getting on the internet, people were starting to get used to the internet idea, and the Melissa virus came out. And the Melissa virus was the first time that it made like public news of some sort of a real attack. And this Melissa virus, it was crazy because it spread very, very quick through a Word doc, and it kind of set the trend for the entire future of worms and malware. And the I Love You virus came out shortly after, and that one was so bad, in the first day alone, over 45 million people were infected. And it shut down people like Ford Motor Company. It shut down a ton of companies because they were so infected it brought their networks down. And it spread very, very rapidly. And that was kind of the beginning. And so to deal with those, patches became important. And everybody started talking about you need to patch your Microsoft operating system. You need to patch Microsoft Office. You need to patch all of these things. Patches are important. And people started learning this concept of patches. And as we talk today, you'll see patches are still extremely important. Then the next big phase was phishing scams, and they're still going on today. And that was where you get the email that looks like it came from PayPal, and it says, hey, for security purposes, your account's been reset, and you've got to click this link to go turn it back on. And you see a lot of these things, and AOL was kind of the godfather of that one. And then they started going, and for all of phishing, it really came down to education. I mean, you had to be aware, and everybody hopefully by this point in time has heard the term phishing at some level. Phishing just basically means you get an email, it pretends to be from somebody that you would trust, whether it be from a financial institution, whether it be from the IRS, whether it be from whoever, and then you're told to do something where ultimately you'll give up some sort of access. And that's what phishing is, and it's obviously taken hold. It's not going to go away anytime soon, but people are at least kind of savvy to a lot of it now, and they don't fall victim to it near as much as they were. The next big phase was these really kind of complex malware that were designed to actually understand what you're doing on your computer. And the one that's gained the most popularity is a program called Zeus. And Zeus is really, really bad stuff. And what happens is it gets infected on your computer, and there's a million different ways it can get on. But once it's on, what it does is it's programmed to actually understand different banking applications. So it waits to see if you go online. And if you go online to do online banking, the minute you do, it looks and says, okay, which one are you logging into? And then based on which one you're logging into, it comes to life and it starts doing commands behind the scenes and like transferring funds on behalf of you without you knowing it and doing crazy stuff like this. And Zeus was really, really bad for a while, and that's when they introduced multi-factor authentication. And anybody who does online banking should know what this is. When you type in your login, then you type in your password, the first time you set up your account, then you have to also do some sort of challenge or some sort of security question, or there's some additional level of something you have to do. The reason they did that was to fight off things like Zeus, because Zeus would only know how to do the username and password, but it wouldn't know that secondary challenge. It didn't know what that was, and a human would have to enter that in. And that's why they did that. And it was an extra step for you guys, kind of more of a headache, but it was to address this type of malware that was going on out there. So there was a reason behind why they did it, and it has really taken a big step forward in stopping it. Today, the big hot item right now is CryptoLocker and CryptoWall, and it's basically known as ransomware. And ransomware, has anybody been infected with ransomware? Anybody aware they've been infected? A couple people? Yeah. It's terrible, right? It's absolutely miserable. So here's the problem with ransomware. If you get ransomware on your computer, unless you actually pay the ransom, there is nothing you can do but reload your computer. There is no like antivirus to fix it after the fact. And that's the problem with this stuff. So what happens is it gets on your computer in a bunch of different ways, and I'll kind of show today how that can happen. And once it's on your computer, what it starts doing is it starts encrypting all of your files. So it goes through and says, I'm gonna look at every Excel file, every picture, every Word doc, every PDF, everything you have that's a file that you might want access to again. It encrypts that file. It makes it so it's an unreadable file, every one of them. Then it posts a little message on your screen and it says, hey, guess what? It sucks to be you. There is now malware on your computer. It's called ransomware, and you have to pay a fine. Otherwise, you'll never get your files back. So unless you have a backup of them, they're gone forever. Now to pay, you can go online. They have it's almost like a business. You can pay with Bitcoin. You go online. You pay. It's generally around $45. You pay the little fee, and then they send you a little code. You type the code in, and all of your files become magically unlocked. Go ahead. Here, it's you and me both. Here's the biggest problem. Bitcoin has changed everything. In the old days, there was a certain amount you could because you would use like a credit card or something like that. Well, someone has to process that credit card. Bitcoin is just magic money. It's basically just bits of information that are all over the world. There's no human entity tied to a Bitcoin. So to trace it when you send it out, there's nothing to trace it to. It's just in the internet. It just becomes air. So it's almost impossible to trace it back. And by the time, even if you do, in most of these cases, the criminals are going to be in other countries. Most of the time they're going to be in Russia, they're going to be in Korea, they're going to be in China. They're going to be in places that even if they know where they're sitting in their house, the odds of you getting them to do anything for you are slim to none. And that's the problem that we have pretty much with criminals in general right now. When you talk about cybercrime is such a big industry in other countries because there is such low risk. The odds of the United States going through all the trouble to extradite that one guy and bring him back here so we can prosecute, unless it's a major ring, it's just not going to happen. They've got bigger fish to fry. So that's the problem. It's just impossible. That's why all you can do is, to me, it comes down to awareness and protect yourself. I mean, it's kind of, the more you know and the more you can do to defend yourself, that's your best bet now, because the government's just not going to be able to catch every one of these criminals that are out there. It's not going to happen today, at least. And the technology to stop them really isn't about technology. As I'll show you today, a lot of it comes down to human mistakes. And you can't really patch those types of things. So it's hard. I mean, it's really, really hard. So the best thing you can do with this one is backups. If you don't back up your computer regularly, and regularly meaning at least every few weeks, you're running risk. Because think about all the stuff that you put on your computer over a 3 or 4 week period. If you're putting pictures or, God knows what you have, work stuff. If that stuff's not being backed up and then it's lost forever. So to me, if you're backing your stuff up, then you're reducing your risk. Because then if somebody comes in and says, hey, your computer's tanked and you have to pay us, you can just go delete, download all your stuff back up off the backup, and you're right where you left off, and it's no big deal.